By the time the sirens cut through the wet night and neighbors started shouting, he was already standing over the driver's door of my car like he owned the whole block, bat in his hands, breath steaming in the cold air, and the look of a man who thinks rules apply to other people. That image is what I keep replaying in my head, but it hadn't happened yet when the phone woke me up with a vibrating, frantic light. I'm telling you that first because the memory bends everything that came before into a single hard line. One stupid minute, one voicemail, and then a decision that pulled me straight into the middle of something awful. I remember lighting a cigarette I didn't finish and thinking for half a second about calling someone else. Then I smashed the phone against my palm and ran for my keys. I live in a mid-sized Midwestern city that likes to pretend it's calm at night. People here leave their bikes unlocked and their porch lights on until winter comes. It's the kind of place where you believe rules mostly work. On ordinary nights I read until 1 in the morning, or I edit other people's stories for money, or I walk the dog past a diner that never changes its neon sign. Jenna and I grew up in the same neighborhood. Loyalty is more than a word for me. When her name lit up my screen I answered before it even finished ringing. She didn't speak. There was only a bubbling, broken sound on the line and then silence. I called back and went straight to voicemail, which is where she left the message that smashed the world into a new shape. Her voicemail is the kind of thing that doesn't let you breathe. "It's Mark," she said, voice soggy with tears and a sort of drunken slur that made every word jagged. He's circling, by the alley," she kept hiccuping and then saying my name like a lifeline. Her voice was so close to the phone I could hear the tiles in a bathroom stall and the hand dryer humming in the background. "Don't drive away," she said at one point, and then later, "call me if he comes in," and it ended with a sob that sounded like she'd been punched in the ribs. I sat very still and played the message 3 times because it felt like a test. Was this real or my brain letting panic be louder than common sense? Men like me tell women to call the police in movies like that's enough, and I hate how useless that phrase sounded in my mouth that night. So I left the couch, pulled on a jacket, and ran into the rain. The city smelled like wet asphalt and fried food as I locked the door. My keys were cold, my heart was loud. I drove with the windshield streaked by wipers, neon signs smeared into long red lines, streets slick with a constant mirror of lights. It was 2:14 a.m. and most bars were dumping out drunks into the cold, but the road from my apartment to the part of town Jenna had been at is the shortest route you can take when you want to make an entrance without thinking about consequences. I called her back twice and got voicemail both times. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my mind was noisy, thinking about glass and the kinds of men who come back and the times I'd read about someone waiting too long. I told myself not to be dramatic, but I also told myself I wasn't going to let someone who had been broken by him become someone's tragedy because I hesitated for a bureaucratic reason or because I thought a phone call would fix everything. When I pulled up, the bar's parking lot was half empty and smelled like beer and smoke. The rain fattened on my hood and the parking lot lights made phantom actors out of the cars. I saw her before she saw me, small through the open door, hair plastered to her face, mascara streaked down her cheeks, yank of a coat that wasn't doing its job. She looked like the last thing I expected to see in the middle of chaos, exhausted, terrified, and unbearably alive. I climbed out, opened the passenger door, and she slid in without a word, as if sliding into a lifeboat that had no sparkles but did have my terrible driving. Her hands shook when she took off her wet boots. She smelled of perfume and fear. I didn't ask a lot of questions then because questions can be luxuries we can't afford in a crisis. I started the engine and pulled away, raining city lights turning into streaks behind us, promising nothing but motion and the thin relief of distance. We both breathed for the first time only after the car doors clicked shut and the heater finally pushed some warmth into the cabin, like a small, stubborn sun. Jenna's breath came in quick, wet little gasps, and when I leaned over to shut her hair away from her face, I could smell the sharp sting of cheap tequila under the sweeter scent of her perfume. The smell was raw and honest, the kind of thing you can't hide behind a smile. For a few heartbeats, I let myself believe the worst was over, just me, the wheel, and Jenna trying to stop trembling. I talked in small, steady sentences because long speeches felt fake and would only fray both of us faster. I took the long way home on purpose, choosing back roads with one-way streets and crooked stop signs, places I knew well enough to move without thinking. Those streets have their own rhythm, tired porch lights, a stray cat slipping between trash bins, damp leaves sticking to tire treads. I drove slow, less to hide and more to let Jenna collect herself, to let her say whatever she needed into the dark without forcing it out. She kept rubbing her palms up and down her jeans like she was trying to dry them, saying nothing for stretches and then muttering fragments. He's circling. I thought he'd come in. I was so scared, each piece like a loose plank on a floor about to give way. The car felt too small for how loud my thoughts were. My hands started to shake on the steering wheel as if the cold had moved into my bones, but it wasn't cold that made them tremble. It was that tiny hairline doubt that tries to seed itself when you least want it. What if he's still out there, watching? I kept my eyes mostly on the road, but I glanced into the rearview every few seconds like a bad habit. That's when I first saw the truck. A black pickup, maybe the size of a small house by the standards of our city, 2 cars back, its taillights painting 2 steady red moons on the wet asphalt. At first I thought it was coincidence because there are trucks everywhere at this hour. But then I changed lanes to pass a delivery van and the truck matched me almost instantly, holding the same distance as before. I tried not to look frantic, but that failed fast because some things are louder than your will. I slowed down unexpectedly at a yellow light to see if the pickup would slow too, and sure enough its tail lights dimmed in the same rhythm. I made a wide, pointless right on a street I knew dead-ended into a parking lot, and the truck made the same right as if it had a map of my nerves burning behind its headlights. The uncanny precision of it was what made my neck go cold. This wasn't a random fellow commuter. This was deliberate. Jenna noticed the way my jaw tightened and finally whispered, "Is he out there?" Her voice was paper thin. I wanted to lie and say no, that everything was fine and we were already away from him. Lying felt like betrayal then, so I answered, "There's a truck back there. I'll get us someplace safe." We started testing him a little, quietly like we were playing a dangerous child's game and not announcing a strategy. I pulled into a supermarket lot and parked in the farthest stall, then sat with the engine off, listening to the hum of the city and the steady beat of my own blood. A minute later, the truck eased into the row of cars 2 aisles over and idled like it had all the time in the world. The truck's windows were dark, but I could see the shape of a large cab and a shadow where a driver should be. It was not the thing I wanted to prove was true, it was proof. Jenna started to cry then, low and small, the sound caught somewhere between relief and terror. My hands were shaking more, the wheel felt like a thing you could drop, and I realized something ugly and honest. We were being watched, and the watching had the patience of a man who planned to wait until the moment he wanted came. I kept my foot light on the gas, breathing like I was trying not to blow out a candle, and made the first move that felt like a test. A sharp left where I knew a straight road would have been easier. The wet tires sang a small complaint and the world outside the windshield swam in streaks of red and yellow. I glanced in the rearview and saw the truck do the same left, its twin red dots sliding into the same lane I had chosen. My stomach turned over in a way that couldn't be blamed on speed or coffee. This wasn't luck following us, it was attention. So I tried again, this time a sudden lane change to get around a slow box truck, my signal flicking like a nervous eyelid. The pickup mirrored me instantly, the driver keeping the same distance as if he had a ruler measuring 2 cars and a heartbeat. I couldn't tell if anger or calculation sat behind those dark windows, only that the behavior had a rhythm too precise to be random. Jenna's hand found mine on the center console without asking, small and cold, a tiny anchor in the moving dark. When we accelerated to get past a long line of red lights, I felt ridiculous, like a kid proving something to himself. But I floored it anyway because I needed evidence, and evidence is a kind of control. The truck accelerated too, its engine rising into a coarse, animal sound that rolled off the wet pavement. Someone 3 cars back might have grinned at the show of power. I felt trapped, like the road had folded into a corridor. The revving was not an accident. It was a taunt sent through the language of engines, and it made the hair along my forearm stand up. I used side streets to try to lose him, weaving down a skinny road that threads behind houses and dumps you into a quiet strip of late-night businesses. I turned suddenly into an old church lot, headlights carving crosses into wet grass, and cut the engine like a hunter hiding in ferns. We sat in silence, radio off, listening to rain and distant traffic like it might tell us something. 3 heartbeats later the truck eased into the lot, 2 rows over like a stalker arriving by appointment. No horn, no shouting. The park and wait move was a whole mood change. It was patience, not rage, and that was worse. I started to feel my decisions getting smaller, obsessed with checking mirrors and windows, imagining him watching us like a movie that hadn't ended. To force the issue, I made an ugly, ugly choice. I pulled into a busy intersection and stopped in the middle when the light snapped red, a move that made other drivers curse and honk. The truck didn't flinch. It rolled up behind us close enough that I could see the grill dark as a cave. Then the horn came from the truck, long and sour, a thing meant to push and push until a person cracks. Someone yelled from another car. People leaned on throats of radios and aired their annoyance, unaware they were witnessing something deliberate. The buffer we'd had 2 cars of space and the small comfort that comes with it was gone in an instant. The pickup closed in until it seemed to sit on our tail like a patient, heavy thing. The driver tapped his horn again, harder, more personal. The engine growled and the mirror on his side flashed a silhouette raising a hand, not in confusion but in command. I felt adrenaline tighten every cord in my body and thought through very fast the things people say in movies, call the cops, and the ways real life skips the cinematic beats. I pulled my phone from my pocket with hands that wouldn't stop trembling, and I said to Jenna, low and clear, "Get ready. We're not making this easy for him." I hit the gas like I had a choice, and the truck matched me the whole way, its tail lights two angry rubies glued to the back of my hood until the first bump happened, a soft tap that sounded smaller than it felt, like a warning punch. My hands locked on the wheel and Jenna made a small, raw sound behind me that I will never forget, a noise between a cry and a warning. The tap made the car lurch, and the world tilted in a way that told me we had stepped off a cliff. He didn't stop with the warning tap. The next contact was harder, a shove that pushed my bumper forward and rang metal into metal, a cold, high sound that made my teeth ache. I cut across lanes trying to make distance, and the truck ran a yellow light, its driver weaving to stay tight on our tail, making each move feel less like chasing and more like hunting. Other cars honked and swore, but their fury felt distant and small, like TV noise you can ignore until it becomes your life. I took the exit for Jenna's complex like a hand pulling me down into water, heart pounding with stupid, sharp calculations. I drove faster than I should have, ignoring speed limits because hesitation would have meant being caught in the open. The truck kept the same pace, angling in like an animal figuring out how to box prey against a wall. My hands shook so hard that the steering wheel vibrated under my fingers, and I might have dropped it if not for the cold corner of panic making me cruelly focused. We pulled into the driveway and I killed the motor, but the truck didn't stop. It barreled in behind us and cut the engine with a sound like a thing holding its breath. I watched the passenger seat through his dark window, and then I saw the door open. He stepped out, and for a moment I couldn't place his face among the many bad faces I've seen in bars and courtrooms. Then he lifted a baseball bat like it was a scepter, and something in my chest went very quiet. That bat was not accidental. It was aggressive and deliberate, and the kind of thing that ends stories badly. He came around to our side of the car and began pounding the roof and driver's side window with the bat, each hit making the metal scream and making Jenna curl inward like she could disappear through the seat. The hits grew angrier and faster until one blow smashed a tail light in a shower of red plastic, and the car alarm ripped open the night with a glassy wail that sounded impossible coming from such a small machine. The bat swung again, and a neighbor's porch light flicked on like someone had finally noticed the scene in their mirror. From above, a voice started shouting his name and recording with their phone, a neighbor on a balcony shouting that they were filming and to get away from the car. The sound of a camera app clicking made me feel strangely sane, like evidence being made visible. Another voice called out, "Get back," from a doorway, and somewhere someone was already on the phone. The combination of the alarm, the bat, and the neighbor's light made the night feel like a bad movie I'd stepped into without consent. Jenna shoved at my sleeve and said, "Run, now." Her voice was pitched with a force I had never heard from her before, a brittle half-weapon sound. We didn't think about keys or the cost of leaving the car behind. We only thought about getting into a door with locks and people. We sprinted across wet pavement with our shoes slapping like small guns, Jenna ahead and me covering, my lungs burning and my mind cataloging every possible exit, every raised shadow. He swung the bat again and hit the trunk as we passed, the sound a punctuation mark I will hear for the rest of my life. A neighbor on the second-floor balcony held up a phone and filmed the whole assault, angle wide enough to catch the truck, the bat, the smashed light, and us running into the building's entry while another neighbor yelled that someone was calling 911. The siren on the other end of the phone, someone's voice saying, "We're on the way," felt both late and like a promise. We slid into the lobby, and the automatic doors closed like the last good thing that night, though the raw edges of fear had only just begun to settle into the bones of everything that came next. The lobby door felt like a seal when it shut, but the sound of the car alarm still vibrated in our ears as if it had lodged in our bones, and we couldn't breathe easy yet. We waited there for what felt like an hour, though it was only minutes, watching the rain beat off the glass and listening to neighbors murmur under their breath. Someone had already dialed 911, the dispatcher had asked for our names and the address, and then for details we barely had words for. When the police cars finally pulled into the lot, blue lights painting the wet concrete, I felt both relieved and hollow, like the fight had moved from muscle to paperwork. Officer Ryan Cole was the first uniform through the automatic doors, boots loud against tile and a badge that looked small and tidy until you saw the tired set of his face. He introduced himself with the sort of plain voice that tries to be calm and ends up making you calmer because it is steady. Ryan took our statements in a small room off the lobby, asking the same questions in the same order, scribbling the answers and then asking them again like a metronome. He listened, then paused and asked Jenna things gently, where Mark had been sitting in the truck, whether he'd threatened to hurt her before, and what we saw him smash on the car. His pen kept moving, and every tick felt like a piece of truth getting pinned down. They walked the lot with flashlights, photographing the smashed tail light, the dented bumper, the skid marks in the wet asphalt, each image a clean, quiet thing that would someday be proof. A neighbor handed Ryan her phone and said, "I filmed everything here." The video was grainy at night, but it showed the truck, the bat, the blows, our running, all of it framed like a terrible short film. Ryan thanked her, uploaded the clip into the system, and handed me a printed copy of the footage's file name and timestamp. It felt odd to watch yourself being attacked through someone else's camera, to see fear captured in pixels and then turned into evidence. An ambulance crew checked us in the parking lot after Ryan asked for medical attention, and the EMTs moved with efficient calm that felt like a different economy from ours. Jenna was shaking so hard she could hardly sit still. They wrapped a blanket around her and checked her pulse, noting bruises on her shoulders and a cut on her lip. I kept replaying the flat sound of the bat and found a shallow ache under my ribs where a hit had landed. The EMT wrote it down, took photos of the bruises, and gave us emergency medical notes, short, factual pages that read like receipts for violence. They said those notes would be important for court and insurance, and they made me hold them like they were small talismans. Back in the lobby, Ryan gave us a case number, an odd string of numbers that suddenly felt like an anchor in the chaos. Case 241789, he said, pushing the paper across to me as if handing over a lifeline. He explained that they would try to locate Mark, but that this is often a slow work and that we needed to preserve any evidence, clothes, phone records, texts, and the neighbor's video. He also told us to go to the if any pain got worse and to keep the medical notes intact. His voice was careful when he admitted the ugly truth. The law moves in its own time, not always the time victims need. A woman with a soft, determined face introduced herself as Lena Parker, the victim advocate assigned to our case, and she moved through the numbers and the forms like someone who had learned how to hold two kinds of grief at once. Lena sat with Jenna and me in a corner of the lobby and talked about things that sounded both hopeful and bureaucratic: an emergency protective order, local shelter options, a hotline, and a plan to serve Mark with papers. She handed us a list of resources, wrote down the number for a local shelter that keeps addresses secret, and explained how an advocate from her program would escort Jenna through filing for a temporary protective order. Lena also taught us practical steps in a calm, blunt way: save your clothes, screenshot threats, lock social accounts, set a one-touch emergency number, and said she would be there to call courts and follow up. We left the parking lot with a case number, a handful of medical notes in my pocket, and Lena's number saved under help, because we were still too messy to name what we needed more precisely. The city noise returned in small, abrasive bites, sirens fading, cars rolling by, someone calling a dog, and Jenna's breathing hitched in short, ragged intervals that would not settle for a long time. Officer Ryan closed the file for the night and promised follow-up, and Lena stayed on the phone with the shelter line until there was something concrete to hold. That night, paperwork and neighbor video and the first small kindnesses of strangers became the scaffolding we were clinging to, thin but real, while the rest of the world went on as if nothing had happened. The court clerk's handwriting on that thin sheet of paper looked like a bad joke: temporary protective order granted, effective upon service. I read it in the dull light of my kitchen like a man reading someone else's news. The paper promised safety, but it was useless until someone handed it to Mark, and handing it to him meant putting him on notice. Lena Parker warned us this would be the hardest part, getting him served, and she was right. The law moves in forms and steps, and those steps felt too slow for the two of us sleeping in separate rooms and checking every car in the driveway like a ritual. For days, we watched the world with too much attention. I drove Jenna to discreet court appointments and back along roads we never took before, changing lefts and rights like a chess player avoiding a predictable trap. We had phone lists and emergency numbers taped in places so obvious they felt secret, and I taught myself to hit the one-touch 911 button on my phone with the practiced motion of someone who had rehearsed fear. Every morning began with checking the tires, the undercarriage, and every lock on our doors because Lena had told us that predators look for patterns. We followed her instructions because they were practical and because they gave nervous muscles something to do. Service attempts slid by like ghosts. The process server would show up to addresses Mark was rumored to be at, then phone numbers would be disconnected, and someone would say they'd seen him at a gas station 3 towns over. Each missed attempt rewired my jaw to clench and my sleep to fray. Officer Ryan Cole called to say they'd be canvassing areas and checking plates, and his voice was steady, but that steadiness carried the same tired gap Lena had warned us about. Police fight fires as best they can, but they can't be everywhere at once. The legal papers existed on a timeline that honored calendars, not pulse rates. As the days passed, adrenaline stopped being a shock and became a background hum you don't notice until it fades. My hands learned new small tasks: how to check a car alone by sweeping a flashlight beneath bumpers, how to block doors and windows at night with a heavy sofa, how to program a friend's number as one touch just in case. Jenna started keeping emergency cards in every purse and shoe, a blunt instruction on paper for strangers who might help. We saved every text and screenshot, every bruise photo and the neighbor's balcony video, because Lena had said evidence is memory you can carry into a courtroom. Sleep left us in stages. Some nights I lay awake counting the ways we might be seen, patterns of garbage cans at the curb, the timing of streetlights, the way our building's stairwell echoed. Other nights I fell asleep in fits, jerking awake at the smallest noise. Jenna took longer to come down from adrenaline. She would sit on the edge of the bed and breathe like it was a task, and twice call Lena at 2 in the morning when a car idled too long outside. I tried to sleep with the television on low because human noise can sometimes hide the shape of danger, but often the TV only echoed the quiet in the room. Bills trickled in like rain through a bad roof. The auto shop gave me a number that made my chest tight and my mouth taste like pennies. The bumper, the tail light, the alignment, $2,300 before the deductible, the mechanic said in a voice that expected me to flinch. The ER sent a stack of white envelopes that smelled like bleach and the hospital's paper towels. They brought a bill for stitches and for the ambulance that had seemed like help at the moment. I took fewer gigs that week because my head would not let me focus for long stretches, and Jenna missed shifts because her manager wouldn't shift schedules. The money we had saved looked smaller in the ledger of this kind of damage, and the idea that safety could cost someone so much made me angry in a clean, hot way. We kept the case number close like a thin talisman, 241789. Officer Ryan called sometimes with updates, and Lena set up a meeting with a court assistant who promised to speed up service when possible. Still, the waiting stretched and stretched, and we learned to live in the small rituals of vigilance. We argued sometimes about how much risk to take and whether being visible to friends made us safer or more exposed. I realized then that protecting someone isn't a single heroic act. It's 1,000 small, ugly choices made over and over, and each choice costs something you can count: time, sleep, money, sanity. The law promised help, neighbors lent their cameras and courage, and Lena kept showing up. That was real, but it didn't make the nights any less long. The call came in the middle of a Thursday when I was folding laundry like the world could still behave itself, and Ryan's name lit the screen in that flat, official way that made my stomach drop and my hands go cold. He was short and to the point over the phone, saying they'd finally tracked Mark to his mother's house out of state, and a process server had caught up with him there, handed him the papers, and photographed the moment. Hearing that sentence felt like watching a tide finally turn. The paper that had been useless in my kitchen was now a live thing with teeth. Jenna pressed her forehead into my chest and let out a sound that was half laugh and half sob. It was a sound that marked the end of waiting and the start of something still raw. When Lena told us the order was officially enforceable upon service, the word enforceable landed in the room like furniture rearranged. Suddenly the rules we had been living around had legs and could be pointed at a person. It did not erase the dents in our car or the bruise on Jenna's arm, and it did not make the night stop being loud with caution, but it gave us legal ground to stand on. I remember thinking, in a mean little corner of my head, that it had taken a smashed tail light and a neighbor's shaky video to make somebody sit up and act. That thought felt ugly and true, like a stain that won't come out, and I couldn't decide if being angry about it was more useful than being grateful. The hearing was a thin rectangle on my laptop with Judge's name at the top, and Mark in a grainy window that smelled of stale coffee and bad decisions. He read his words carefully, telling the camera he'd been getting help and working on himself, and the way his face went softer on screen made my skin crawl because soft words can hide sharp intentions. Jenna watched him through Lena's shoulder and breathed loudly enough that the cat on my couch looked up. The judge listened to the tapes, looked at the evidence Lena and Ryan had organized, and extended the protective order for a year, clear signed and explained in language that sounded like a promise backed by a gavel. The extension felt like a hard border drawn around our days, something to point to when fear came prowling. The neighborhood changed in small, fierce ways almost overnight. People who had been polite strangers turned into active neighbors with flashlights and tools and a worry that matched ours. A woman on the third floor bought motion lights and installed a camera pointed at the parking lot. A man who owns the corner bodega walked Jenna to her car the first week after the order was served, and his wife left a spare key in case of emergency. Someone organized a texting chain for late-night check-ins, and a gang of neighbors organized rotating watch shifts, the way a church organizes volunteers. Their cameras caught license plates and late-night footsteps, Their voices and their presence made the dark less absolute, and that collective care did more to quiet the nights than any single order ever could. Lena helped Jenna move into a transitional confidential housing program the way you help someone move a fragile living thing. You pack what matters and leave anchors behind. The process was quiet and respectful. A neighbor drove the moving box on the last day, and a few people showed up to lift furniture like they were stacking armor. We still varied routes and kept that one-touch 911 button practiced, but there was a new layer. People who had stood in our building's doorway and watched the bat hits now sat with us over coffee and argued about how to rotate nights. It is weird and beautiful to be protected by a jury of strangers who became family overnight. Even with the paper and the cameras and the judge's year-long extension, some nights are still long and sharp. There is relief braided with a low, constant watchfulness that I think might live in me for a long time, and sometimes I say things that grate in the way bravery and bitterness do when you're tired. We depend on neighbors' cameras and shaky videos more than we like to admit, and sometimes that's the only thing that turns a piece of paper into protection. Still, for the first time in weeks, I can walk Jenna to her car without feeling like my ribs are trying to escape. That's small and huge all at once, and it's enough to keep us moving forward while the system catches up and the community holds the line. The last time I stayed up all night was the first night Jenna left our building for good, and I remember standing in my kitchen watching the slow sweep of a streetlight and thinking about how fragile safety looks standing alone. Months later now, that night feels both immediate and strange, like bad weather you survived and still carry the umbrella inside you. Jenna moved out under Lena's plan, in a van loaded with labeled boxes and a neighbor who pretended not to look at the new address, because the best kind of help is quiet and secret. She now lives in another city where the housing is confidential, the mail goes through a program that doesn't show her location, and the people who run the house treat privacy like sacred work. She started a new job a few weeks after she left, something different from the late-night shifts that had made her easy to reach and easier to stalk. The new boss texted once to welcome her, and she sent me a photo of a small, clean desk with a plant and a coffee mug that said "New Day." That picture made me cry in the bathroom, a stupid, ugly release. Her voice on the phone became steadier with time, less ragged at the edges, and she learned to sleep harder and longer in a place that didn't echo every footstep. The wariness didn't evaporate, but it softened into a shape she could manage. I started therapy because Lena said it might help me stop remembering every snap of a bat and start learning how to breathe again. The therapist taught me small, practical things, grounding techniques, a plan for nightmares, and how to name the exact feeling in my chest so it stopped ruling me. Therapy was expensive, slow, and humiliating in the way that anything that has to go deep often is, but it worked. I found ways to stop replaying scenes on loop and began to sleep in whole, honest segments. It didn't cure the watchfulness, but it made room for other parts of life to grow back. We paid down the bills bit by bit. Insurance covered some of the car work, but not all, and Jenna had to build a new wardrobe for her job because the clothes she left with were soaked and bruised by memory. I took extra editing gigs, worked weekends, and learned how to say no to invitations because my life suddenly required the rigid structure of paying for safety. The ledger of costs, repairs, ER visits, missed wages, sat on the kitchen table for weeks like a quiet list of small debts that add up to a life rearranged. Paying it down felt like claiming a tiny victory after a theft had been committed. Neighbors stayed in the picture in ways that surprised me. The balcony neighbors video was the reason the case moved, and after the hearing a group of them installed more cameras, posted watch schedules, and left an extra set of keys with Jenna when she still lived in our building. That solidarity changed our view of the city. People we barely spoke to before showed up with casseroles and extra batteries and an unusual, fierce kind of patience. I still hate having to explain to people that the only reason a protective order mattered was because someone witnessed it and filmed it, but that ugly fact forced a useful truth. Community was part of the security system. We're not the same as we were, and I don't want to pretend that life simply resumed. Some nights I still wake with a tightness under my ribs from feeling engines behind me, and Jenna calls me once a week at odd times just to say the word okay and hear mine back. The vigilance is a quiet companion, the kind you don't always name, but that reshapes the furniture of your days. At the same time, we eat dinner without arguing about exit routes, laugh without falling into a memory, and slowly stack days that are not measured by fear. If there's a takeaway, it's a bitter one. Keeping someone alive during a night of terror costs more than heroism. It costs money, time, sleep, and the simple happiness of not having to think twice about leaving the house. But it also taught me the concrete ways survival happens, Witnesses with phones who record what would otherwise be stories, neighbors who will stand guard, officers who file the papers, and advocates like Lena who thread the legal and human parts together. Those pieces don't erase the damage, but they build something like a floor you can stand on. I can say, plainly and stubbornly, that we owed Jenna every small thing we did that night, and the fact that it took community, cameras, and paperwork to make that happen should make people uncomfortable enough to care.